Back. When it comes to managing your property, you want to make sure it's in the hands of people you can trust. So our sponsors at Woods Oviatt Gilman have insight and advice they can provide you. Welcome, Caroline and Tom. Thanks for joining me.
Thank you, Chelsea.
Of course. So let's break down and talk about why someone should consider putting their home, rental, or other real estate into an LLC, corporation, or a trust.
I think a lot of times when you hear about an LLC or a corporation, you think of big, maybe a criminal enterprise or shell corporations, something mischievous going on. But in reality, these entities are used all the time by normal people who are just looking to protect themselves from personal liability and to make management of a property easier when there's multiple owners.
Okay, makes sense. So Tom, how does an LLC or corporation actually hold property, and when is it the better choice?
Yes, so a deed is a public record. When you purchase the property, it's recorded with the county clerk. So anybody can go onto the county clerk's website, pay a small fee, and look at your deed and find out where you live. So one benefit that a lot of celebrities, athletes take advantage of is putting the property into an LLC. They'll name it whatever, and then it's a lot harder to connect the dots there. But another benefit, as I mentioned just a moment ago, is protection for personal liability. So if there's a slip and fall, maybe you own a restaurant or a rental property, that person can't go after your personal assets, maybe your home or your bank accounts. They can only go after the assets owned by the LLC, which is usually just the property.
Makes sense. Okay, so privacy and protecting your assets are kind of the two biggest reasons. So what should someone consider when deciding on an LLC versus a corporation?
One of the other benefits that I mentioned earlier is management when you have multiple owners. So a lot of, maybe you go into business with your sibling, friend to own a rental property. One of these entities will allow you to dictate the rules of who makes the day-to-day decisions, how is the income allocated when it comes in, when can somebody get out. One of the other things you want to consider is there are costs involved with forming these, so it's not as cheap as just putting it into your own name.
Right.
That's a consideration. And the other thing is that it doesn't protect you from Medicaid recovery, which is something that Caroline's going to talk about.
Okay, yeah, Caroline, can you briefly explain first how a trust holds property and the practical benefits for trust owning real estate?
Sure. So a trust is a legal document that's a vehicle that can hold an asset, and then it tells, the legal document tells the trustee how to manage the asset, who the beneficiaries are, who could benefit from the assets that are within. As Tom had mentioned, that one of the things trusts can do, especially if they're irrevocable, is they can protect the assets from a Medicaid recovery, so paying for nursing home costs, which are very expensive. Here in Western New York, the average year in a nursing home is about $150,000 to $200,000 a year. So if you're in the nursing home for a year or two, it can be the entire cost. Your entire home value can be used for paying for costs for just 2 years of your life. And then what you worked your entire life for doesn't go to your kids. So it's one of the options we have in addition to protecting from estate tax. It also allows it to be non-probate, which allows us, the family, to administer the wishes of the individual without going to court for an expensive proceeding.
Right. And what are the main advantages and drawbacks that we should know about when using a trust for real estate?
Sure. One of the main advantages is the asset protection portion of it, which the corporation or the LLC does not have. So it protects from estate tax if there's planning involved, also with Medicaid recovery. Again, there's rules involved in that, but if they're irrevocable trusts, those are two ways to protect the value of the assets within, and one of them being real estate, which is the topic of today. One of the drawbacks is if it's irrevocable, very hard to change and amend, which that's where a corporate entity, you can change the rules, you can change the owners, much harder. If not, you can't, depending on which trust option that you use.
Okay, makes sense. There is a little bit more flexibility when it comes to a corporation.
Definitely.
Okay. Can you give us a simple example of where each option makes sense and when people actually might use both?
Sure. I'll start with a trust. So again, Grandpa Joe, he's still living at home, but he's in his 70s and he's thinking about hearing about his friends, so he decides that he wants to put his home in an irrevocable trust so that as time goes on, his kids won't have to go to court to administer it. And hopefully, if we get 5 years from the time he's transferred the property, it's now non-recoverable for his nursing home costs. And then Tom can talk about.
As I mentioned before, LLCs and corporations, they're not just for the Tony Sopranos of the world who are trying to protect the bada bing. It's for everyday people who own real property and want to protect themselves from liability and to manage the asset with a lot cleaner rules and make it easier to pass things on.
And I'm going to go back to Grandpa Joe. If Grandpa Joe has an LLC, his property in an LLC, but now he's looking at protecting his assets either from estate tax or for nursing home costs, we can take the membership interest and put it in a trust. So you start with the corporate interest, put the membership interest or the stock, corporate stock in the trust, and then you have the benefit of both worlds.
Okay, you've given us a great picture here, but I'm sure there's probably a lot more questions that our viewers have. So if you do, you can learn more about how our sponsors at Woods Oviatt Gilman can help you manage your LLC, corporation, or property trust by visiting their website or calling the number right there on your screen. Thank you both so much for coming in.
Thank you very much,
Thank you
Chelsea.
so much.